call the meeting to order. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming together again at our December meeting. I'm Scott Bruner. I'm Deputy Secretary for KDADS and your chair. You should have a packet of materials in front of you. There's an agenda, but on top of the agenda is a conflict of interest form. We're planning to, at some point in the meeting, consult with all of you about going into executive session to review the property proposals that the county received through the RFP process, to hear that information, to comply with various parts of the ARPA compliance and other kinds of things. We need to have your conflict of interest statement. So if you could, there's a project name that I filled in for you, hopefully, and just on the back of it, just your name and signature and date, and we'll gather those things up when we go into executive session, if we go into executive session. But underneath that form is the agenda for today. We're going to have a presentation from our partners at Greenbush about the survey that they were conducting, the results from that, discussion about real property proposals. And then the other item that's in the materials is a draft version of the report, interim report that Greenbush is working on with us to reflect on our activities over the last several months. And then so like your comments on that, if you've had a chance to read it. And also there's a section in there for recommendations if we have those to make before the legislature meets. So that's our agenda for today. Any questions about the agenda before we move on? Not hearing any. Let's see, approval of the minutes. There's two sets because we've met twice since the last since last time. November 6th was our regular meeting, and November 17th was a special meeting we held to endorse the idea of having a town hall meeting. Any additions or corrections to the minute, either of those sets of minutes? Not hearing any. Representative? There's a motion by Representative Helgerson to adopt the minutes as circulated. Jason Gregory had his hand up first. Mark, thank you for that. It's been moved and seconded. Any objections to approving the minutes as circulated? Hearing none, those are approved. So we'll transition now to a presentation from Greenbush about the results of their survey. I copied the slides for you, so you've got those on paper, but Lisa's going to present them as well. Lisa Pelkey.
Oh, I don't know how to get it to project initially. Oh, there we go. Thank you. It was you. All right. Before I start, before I start, I just want you to know that collecting data and making it available to you all, we take very seriously to make sure that you have informed and correct data when you're making your decisions. So know that everything that I have presented up here and everything that I collect now and in the future is also examined by two other statistical analysts at the Learning Tree at Greenbush. So I'll just start with considerations for potential locations. Oh, not sure. I didn't touch a thing. You're messing with me. Okay. All right, so we asked people, what should the state of Kansas and Sedgwick County consider when determining the location of the state hospital? So this was our overarching question. They did have the ability to read some information and then look at a 2-page information document. And then they were provided a list with a choice to put in write-ins where available. So we surveyed from November 3rd to November 30th of this year, which is almost 30 days, about 27 days. Know that we sent emails all across the county. We sent mailers along the outer edges of the county where broadband is low, where people may not have internet subscription. We offered the survey in 6 different languages, and we provided a phone number if somebody needed the survey read to them. So in addition to that, we passed out postcards at the coalition meeting, and those people then made contacts with their people. So after 30 days of cleaned responses, we had 882. We needed about 400 to have a reliable, valid survey data. So we were way over our limit. So with 882, of those, the emailed were 448. The ones from the mailer, the postal service were 3, and then the ones from the coalition members and the contacts were 431. So our sample size is proficient. It's good. So we had 301 respondents who read the informational document. And I think this is important because down at the bottom, you'll see in 927, some people after reading this informational document chose not to take our survey. So some people clicked out. So we had 882 that completed the survey. Of the people that took the survey, the US Census 2022 shows about 50-50 male, female in Sedgwick County. Our survey was very heavy female. So we had about 82% female and about 18% male. We did have 2 people identify as non-binary as a write-in. For self-identified race, you'll see our race categories were higher than the census, again, 2022 census. And that is because on the 2022 census, people were only allowed to choose one. We allowed them to do multiple mark, which is why theirs equals 100% and ours does not. So one person could have marked white and Asian. Other responses included, but are not limited to, Indigenous Latin, and then Mezzo-Tizio. Self-identified Hispanic, Latino, Spanish origin, the US Census, 16%, surveyed 9. So looking at the area of responses, we'll see that the one on the left is the census, and that is the 2020 census because that's what we had for population density, not the 2022. So the one on the right are our survey responses. So again, this is 882 surveys completed. We'll see it is very similar with the lighter shades, less populated, and also fewer surveys turned in for those areas. So the top 6 non-starters in order were elementary schools at about 80%, daycares or early childhood education centers at about 77%, middle schools at about 73%, high schools at about 69%, and residential neighborhoods at 49%, and then public parks or recreational facilities at 45%. These are the top 6 places that residents, if we were to survey the entire population, would likely say these are the top 6 places we do not want the hospital. The bottom 4, Sedgwick County Jail, almost 10%, medical hospitals, 6%, police stations, 4.6%, and then mental health services, 3.2%. So these bottom 4 would likely be the ones that would get the least opposition. Some write-in responses. So these were very interesting, and you'll see the N value down here. So number of responses is the N value is 10. So we had 10 people write in that they would not like it to be in downtown Wichita. So these are just 3 examples. Downtown Wichita, do not place this in the downtown area and make it accessible to all South Central Kansas residents and not just those in Wichita. Get out of downtown. So we had 10 of those. Additional responses, we had 51 additional write-in responses, and they varied. So there is no reason not to locate a secure facility away from any of the selections above. Since it will be a locked facility, no problem with the hospital's surroundings or locations. Any public place that if they escaped would give them easy access to harm anyone of the public, especially children. So 51 total. These are 3 examples. Here are all of the selections, and you can see this really good in the report, which is, I have the numbers with the percents in the report, which is linked into with the interim report. So we can see our top 6. Really go back here. You can see a drastic drop when you get down to these 4 locations, and then those areas kind of in the middle. We had 5,320 ticks on all of our selections out of 882 people. So people were able to select more than one, or people didn't have to select any. So one of the questions that I received was, could these top 6 be an anomaly? And no. So the 400 plus that were emailed versus the 400 plus that were coalition contacts, we still ended up with the same 6. And I put them in a different order so that it wasn't the same top 6 if people just happened to be selecting the top 6. So it was a variety. So same with the bottom 4 are still the bottom 4. If I separate them out. So in conclusion, I think the big takeaway is residents in Sedgwick County will likely not be in agreement with locations close to where children go to school, live, or play.
Lisa, just to ask one clarifying question. So you showed in the sample or how many surveys you received, there was the email that went out with the survey link. And then after the Sedgwick County Mental Health and Substance Abuse Coalition had a town hall meeting in the fall in November, we distributed the link at that meeting as well. So that was that kind of second bump of responses. And so those other 2 slides are just showing that the ones that were, I guess, the kind of the cold emails or that went out first had the same, identically the same preferential locations as the people who are maybe a more informed audience, or after this had been out in the world for a little bit to circulate as a survey. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. And both of those groups were over 400, so we could have used either one of those singularly, but I combined them.
In the packet, we have the top 6, but we don't have the bottom 4. Is it possible to get
Oh, yep.
that?
I may have added that after
Okay.
it is. Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
Greenbush draw copies. These are ones that I made. So I made a slide short, but we've got copies.
I probably
With the full
I probably
presentation.
hid the slide. I wasn't sure if you needed to know the bottom 4.
Any other questions for Lisa about the survey results or comments?
Yeah. And again, the full, this is a very condensed version, this presentation. The full data report is linked in your interim report. So if you want to see those ones in the middle as well, they're in there with percents. All right.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Great.
All right.
Thank you, Lisa. And that was part of our effort to, with a little bit of information, try to gather some public input. We've got other efforts to do that tomorrow. I should have mentioned when we started, we've got a town hall meeting tomorrow afternoon at 5, from 5 to 7 at the Hughes Metroplex, to talk about the project and hopefully share the kind of shortlisted properties and locations that we're talking about. we're going to talk about in just a minute, but talk about that with the public as well. So a couple of the efforts around the panel's charge to get that information as well. Next item on the agenda is a presentation and discussion of real property proposals for the Regional Psychiatric Hospital. To share all of the proposals or the addresses for proposals that came in. We've been recommended that we move into executive session to have that conversation. In the executive session, it'll be closed to just the members of the panel, 2 members of the staff from Sedgwick County, and then we'll ask everybody else to leave so we can have that discussion. And then during that executive, it's time limited. And when we, in that executive session, we can only discuss this topic and nothing else. And then when the time's expired for the executive session, we can come out, and if there's actions to take, we take them after we exit executive session. That was the 30-second version of executive session in 101. We will put it in the motion, but we're estimating 50 minutes. 50. Any questions or conversation about the executive session? I've asked the vice chair if she would like to make the motion.
Okay, I move that the open meeting of the South Central Regional Psychiatric Hospital or Psychiatric Hospital Advisory Panel, hereinafter referred to as the advisory panel, be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 754319 for preliminary discussion of the acquisition of real property for the location of a proposed regional psychiatric hospital pursuant to the justification listed in KSA 754319. That the advisory panel resume the open meeting at 2:10. Sorry. Okay. And in this room, and that this motion, if adopted, be recorded in the minutes and be maintained as part of the permanent records of the advisory panel. The advisory panel will use this room, which is the 6th floor conference room at the Ruffin Building, for this executive session. Tanya Cole, Assistant County Manager of Sedgwick County, and Andrew Diltz, Sedgwick County Director of Facilities, are invited to attend the executive session to provide information relevant to the discussion of real property.
Senator Reddy seconded the motion. Any discussion? Claudio and I think Claudio, I sent you the link. Mary, do you have the link to be able to enter the additional Zoom that where the executive session will be? We'll get that to you here in just a second. Any other discussion about the motion? All those in favor of moving into executive session at 1:20, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. So if you've got your conflict of interest statement signed, you can, I guess, pass those to me. Feels like investor days, and we'll session. We got our back in the regular session as well. And so the advisory panel, the executive session is closed, and we're back in our regular advisory panel meeting. So our next item is to take a look at the draft interim report that Greenbush worked with my team on developing. You've got a copy of it in front of you. I don't know, is Monica gonna walk us through it, or? I can do that.
Sorry, I think she's trying to help everyone.
Oh, okay. Just as a reminder, our charge in the executive order directed us to provide an interim report to the governor and legislature on January 15th. And the first report was due January 15th. Our final report's due at the end of the year. And so what we tried to capture in what you've got in front of you is a little bit of background about the project, background about the panel, a summary of our meetings up to now. And what we've talked about, the schematic design is in there. And then on page 6, there's a timeline of the project that, again, is part of what we've been sharing. And all of that's got links to the sites. There's a section on page 7 of the Greenbush survey results and the process for gathering that feedback. On page 8, there's a couple of paragraphs about the property submission process that have blanks until we can release that information of the number of proposals received. And then also about the architectural and engineering service proposals that have been received. And then our next steps, which are to continue gathering public input through the next year. If you have thoughts about what's in the report so far, maybe we'll look at that first for comments. And then if you'd like to make some recommendations that would fit into the report, we can discuss that second. But maybe first, are there any comments about the report or suggestions for additions?
I guess the only thing I'd say is I haven't had a chance to go through the whole thing. Maybe it's here and I missed it, but whether it's I'm not sure I'd say that the entire group has agreed with this. It has been said many times, and I think everybody's at least in principle agreed with something that was mentioned a minute ago in the executive session. That is that if at all possible, if the money's there to try to build out for the full 100 beds, that is a recommendation that has been articulated both today and at previous meetings for a whole host of reasons that all things being equal, everybody would want that. So, and if that's in the report, I just haven't gotten that far, so be it. But if it's not, I think we ought to explicitly have that in the report.
It's mentioned in the charge to the committee, but a recommendation that's more specific than that would be appropriate for the report. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mark, for that. I will make a formal recommendation that we expand it to 100 beds. And we can vote on that. Is that how we'll do it? Vote on that?
We can, if you want to make a motion to have specific language, if you'd like us to go back and work on language to include in the report, and then we can look at it again in our meeting in January, we could do that.
I don't,
either way.
That's fine. I don't know that it needs to be wordsmithed very much.
Representative Carter, one thing that because I'm in agreement with both of you. What if you give me the opportunity to take a look at how many folks in the last 3 years have had to go to Larned for either evaluation or restoration services, what those wait times look like, that will give us a better number to understand. And I would also ask Claudio to do the same thing as far as commitments and the amount of folks. I believe it's around 20% of Osawatomie is occupied by folks strictly here in Wichita. But I think that would give us a really good, better understanding, because in the end, you're going to have to go back and ask the legislatures for more money, correct? And I think if we can build the facts around that and cost benefit, and then make the recommendation in the January meeting after we get those facts back in. Would you be okay with that?
And I agree 100%, but when I pulled the numbers and I pull them regularly, Scott knows this, he gets tired of listening to me, because we have, the last time I remember, it runs about 160 folks that are in county jails now, not just yours, but in our Western, in all of our jails. There's roughly 160, and I bet you that hasn't gone down a bit for the last 3 or 4 years, maybe even 5 years, that are waiting for competency and evaluation and restoration in those jails. So all I'm saying is that the need is there. And that isn't even counting looking at the wait list to get in Osawatomie or Larned, which Scott, do you have that wait list today for Larned? Oh, Larned has open beds. Wow. How many beds do they have open? Okay. Well, that's the first time that I've heard of open beds in Larned. But is it because of staffing, or is it just okay? Okay, great. First time ever that I can ever remember not having a waiting list. And
On the care treatment side.
oh, on care and treatment, but on other stuff we have. Okay. Thank you.
And that might be the time to revisit, because KDADS has the 15 million in their operational cost for budget. Since this isn't gonna be open for that time, we'll have gone through another year. If it's appropriate and if it's okay, could we use that second year of the operational budget to add on to the money we have today? And then that could help us get to the 100. Like, I don't know the cost difference that it would take to go from 50 to 100, but there is that option if it's available.
Thank you, Representative Carpenter. I would definitely support that and take it to the Senate as well, and the governor's office, right along with all of the other representatives that are here. I think if we already know there's a mental health challenge. Our biggest challenge is going to be the staffing component of it. The building part, I think we can probably find funds for that, and we can work on the certifications or whatever else it might need to get it staffed. But it would be very realistic to aim for the 100. That is not a pie in the sky kind of ask.
Thank you. And I didn't even ask you to segue into my next deal about the staffing, but I do think that it's very important for us to take a look at privatizing the staff. There's a lot of states that are already doing that. Florida, Texas, they're hiring companies to run their facilities. And I'm not going to say it's any cheaper, but it may be more efficient. I really don't know that, but I think that we should take a hard look at privatizing the operation of this facility. We have struggled so much at Larned. Our vacancies, are we half staffed? I think roughly we were paying our contract, which is our contract labor, was $40 million. And I think the last numbers that I looked at, about half of our staff out there is contract labor. That's how bad it is. We have not had a nurse on the state staff for at least 5 years that I know of. We may have hired them, but there's none on the staff. There hasn't been for the last year. All of our nurses have been contracted.
About half of the state staff is state employees. Sorry, about half are state employees and the other half are contractors.
So how many nurses are there out there?
260 authorized positions, 130 or so are state staff.
Nurses?
Filled positions, yes.
That's a little different than the numbers that I pulled here just weeks ago. We'll have to look at that.
Yeah.
But I do think that we need to take a look at privatization of that. I've dealt with this for a long time, and I continue. We have spent millions of dollars in Larned in wage increases, and they have basically not improved one bit.
So my question as representing provider organizations on the advisory panel is, of that 50% that's contract, how many are local or from our areas versus out of state? I'm really 100. I have no problem with the concept of the 100. I just remember when Osawatomie spoke last meeting, they said it was taking 160 to run equivalent to the numbers we're talking about now. That's a 320 people workforce at minimum. And I think of my vacancy rate, and I know with Claudio's issues at the hospital and Mary's at MHA and all the other service providers, that's kind of frightening.
Scott, I just wanted to say, I think so I was looking at on page 5, the key charges for this advisory panel, gathering input. We're doing that tomorrow. Make recommendations on workforce development. I don't know where we are on all of that, which was just asked. Make recommendations on operating model for the hospital and the any kind of changes that need to be made to statute. So I think workforce is one of those key issues, and I don't know. We would probably need a lot more information about that.
And I do think that's part of our work over the next year. We've been focused a lot in our first few meetings on getting the site identified, making sure you're all brought up to speed on the kind of parameters of the project. making a decision about location and getting the architectural firm on board gets us a huge step forward on the project. And we can then kind of focus more time next year as we meet every month about staffing concerns, workforce development, because as we said before, this can't just be trying to staff for the state hospital and the 250 or so staff that I'll need, but we've got to grow the whole base so that we aren't robbing from ComCare or Via Christi or any other providers. Attracting some of those agency folks that there's some people who just want to work on a contract. They want to be able to work in a facility for 12 weeks and then go and do something else and come back. That's a legitimate way to organize your time. But for those where these would be really excellent jobs to take to make that easier for them to do. But I don't hear a clear recommendation of something we want from the legislature, or we want the governor to think about for the report in January. We want to work on that, but I don't know that I need a recommendation from all of you to do that. But the focusing or moving ahead on 100 beds, finding the funding for that, getting that secured and built into the project plan, that is a recommendation. If the panel's interested in that we ought to make to the 2024 legislature, so they're aware that that's the direction that the recommendation that we're making. I think we can make that without a whole lot of additional information. Yeah, Representative Carpenter.
So my recommendation for looking at privatization, are we going to vote on that? Is that a formal recommendation, or do I need to make that in a formal recommendation?
I think it's in the charge to the panel to review the operating model of the hospital and how that would work. We're going to gather more information about that. It seems premature to me to vote on it now without other people hearing the same kind of information about what privatization would look like, how that works in other places. We can certainly make that part of our work in the coming year to gather that information.
I just don't want it swept under the rug.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
So maybe the recommendation is to evaluate the merits of privatization. And it's just exploratory to start.
I would say though, because you kind of have a moment in time here when this report goes back in January, it's going to get attention. It's going to get a moment in time with the legislature to look at this. If you do have, and I'm looking specifically at the two of you who represent and Claudia who represents the providers, if there is some piece of legislation, if you come back with 10 recommendations, it's going to be white noise. But if you come back with 1 or 2, I mean, if there is some bill if there's some statute that needs tweaked to make it easier to get staff to, whether it's outside licensing from out of state or something like that, now would be the time to make 1 or 2 specific recommendations. Because if you don't, legislature's in session next month. And if it's not on, above the line by middle of March, we're waiting another year. So I guess my point is, if there's something you want us to think about and add to this as a specific recommendation for the January report, I'd say at that next meeting, carve out 30 minutes or 20 minutes and talk about it.
I know the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Coalition has a workforce subgroup, and they've got some recommendations that they've made over the last couple of years around licensing by the Behavioral Health Sciences Regulatory Board and some of the efforts they're making. So maybe we can bring some of that information back in our meeting in January.
And I will say the legislature has been keenly on the job of trying to reduce licensing. The question is, how much education do these folks really need, not how much people want to pile it on because they have that degree and they took 5,000 hours or whatever. We run into that all the time. It's not about the ability to do the job. It's about piling on all these hourly deals and stuff like that. So we have keenly been on that for the last 2 years since COVID, and relaxing, trying to get down to, just what you need to do the job. The last one was at the nursing home deal where you had to have to run a nursing home, you had to have a 4-year degree. And that's in our state statutes, and that makes no sense absolutely to anybody, but you have to have one. But we're going to deal with that this next year. But thank you.
Other I breezed past Monica from Greenbush, who worked on the report. Are there other comments you would like to make, Monica, to the group about what's in the report?
Hi, everyone. Monica Murdan from Greenbush here. I kept my pneumonia germs home, so I was a minute late coming back from executive committee. Just wanted to present this to you as a draft, as you all know. In your charge, it was articulated how and when reports would go to the legislature. So there is an interim report and then there is a final report. This is just the first blush at trying to get something together for you to consider. As you all know, there's all different kinds of reports and ways that they are scrutinized. In this particular report, it is wide open. So we tried to give you a format that collected the information, but also maximized the use of links in the document to back up any of the information that's there. So we are very open to your suggestions on content as well as formatting. And then the timeline for getting that to the legislature, as you well know, is popping up here, but I believe there will be another panel meeting prior to needing to get this out. So it's totally up to all of you how you want us to do that, but we wanted to get something in front of you that at least gave you a good start, so the homework wasn't last minute. As far as recommendations go, again, totally up to how you would like to do that. Whether it be in an interim or a final, in any processes you have, we will follow up and articulate that in written format so that you can look at it one more time. So again, anything you'd like to be considered, we would just ask that you send that through Scott so we have it all coming in one place, and happy reading.
Thanks, Monica. So the three items I heard to follow up on for the next version of the report. Write something that would recommend that we've identified the funding, something more definitive than that. Go and seek the funding, build into the budget to build the full 100 beds. Will be more artfully constructed than that. The sheriff and Claudio, the sheriff volunteered, come up with the number of beds that he thinks he needs in terms of people waiting for competency treatment at Larned. And we can work with Claudio and other providers in the area that are looking for beds waiting for beds at Osawatomie to get a sense of, is 100 the right number, plus or minus, so we can bring that back for the report. And then the third is maybe a little more structure around making the decision about privatizing the operations of the hospital as a recommendation of something to go to the legislature to have them endorse. I'm sorry, fourth, then workforce. If there are things in particular that we need that are clear this session, workforce items, we ought to include that in a record. Those four items are what I heard. Sure.
Yeah, Scott, I would, part of the discussion that needs to take place as well is catchment areas. At some point, we're going to need to have that discussion because when we talk about the beds, for me, it's actually the beds for South Central Kansas that are going to open up for evaluation and restoration. But what does that catchment area look like? Because anything that we do here frees up resources, say, for Western Kansas and for Eastern Kansas. And so we have to take in consideration, in my opinion, we have to take consideration the entire state and what that catchment area is going to look like for here. It's not just about Sedgwick County. So I would just suggest that, we at some point we look at catchment areas. It gives us a better idea of the surrounding areas, how many beds would be occupied to 100 beds, because that's when you throw in, depending on which counties it is, it goes clear up to Salina for the catchment area. We're going to be a lot closer to that 100 beds. So
that's a really good point.
I think that's a good point. That's why I'm here from Manhattan to make sure we are talking about a lot of space here.
Representative Carpenter.
And just to piggyback on that, Scott, do we have any catchment areas like he's talking about? It's pretty much a free for all, isn't it? Is there a catchment area for each hospital?
For the for the civil commitment sides, there's a catchment area for Osawatomie and one for Larned. Sedgwick County is in Osawatomie's catchment area for that purpose. So if there's a care and treatment case, involuntary commitment case that comes through the screening process, we look at what county that care and treatment order comes from, and based on that county,
That's where they go.
they're routed to either Larned or Osawatomie. In front of that are our state institutional alternatives, which are agnostic about catchment area, but in principle, everybody based on their county of their civil commitment case gets assigned to either Larned or Osawatomie.
Involuntary.
Involuntary, yes. For forensic cases, it doesn't. All of them mostly get to Larned. We can add Osawatomie. We change the statute so that it can be a little more flexible, but
I think that's what I was confused
Yeah,
on.
on
is
the forensic side,
forensic side, because I know there's folks everywhere. It's wherever there's a spot.
I have a chart on the wall in my office of months and things we're going to talk, or things that I think we ought to talk about by month, and catchment area is on there. Can't remember which month it's assigned to, but it's on the list. But that would probably be a good recommendation too, to maybe map out the work plan for the next year as well. So you're all aware of it, the legislature's aware of it. It is in this deal is not that it's random, but that we're just kind of cascading through items. We can put a little more structure around that.
So how do these meetings work once session does start?
That's a
we-
good question, Senator. I wanted to talk about that with future meetings because I'm not quite sure how to accommodate all the four of your schedules. And we don't have to talk about that here necessarily, but I would like to think a little bit about it. Are there other items? If you have other, as you read through the report, things that you think are unnecessary or not highlighted enough, things that they want us to add material to, happy to do that. Other recommendations, I wrote down the 5 that we just talked about, and 6 with kind of the overall work plan, but happy to incorporate those. Any other comments about the report at this point today? Feel like I'm rushing from the executive session. I'm trying to not do that, but did want to talk about future meetings a little bit. If we stay on the schedule we've been on of the second Tuesday or second Monday, we'd be at January 8th. That's the first day of session, I think, for our legislative members. I hope it's a full productive day for the 4 of you. If you can squeeze in an hour or so for our meeting, we'd be happy to host you at KDAD's, or we can find a room in the State House so you don't have to be here necessarily. We're working a little bit against the executive order direction, which says we have this meeting in Wichita, which is great, and it's the right thing to do. We just may need to be a little more flexible with some of the membership as we get into the legislative session. Any concerns about January 8th at this point that we need to look for a different date, or can we keep that date in mind and talk about alternatives for February? Mostly the legislators. I just didn't want to stare.
Yeah, so last session was my very first session and I was not there on the very first day. So I don't know how it proceeds, but I do know the Senate meets at 2:30. That's when we have our official meetings on the Senate floor. So whatever else days or hours you might choose, you might consider that.
Work around that. You all go in it two. Legislators.
If you're going to include the legislators, we probably need to find a different time to set up for the release for the 4 months-ish that the session's in open.
If we can stay as close to the 8th as possible, because we have to get the report in by the 15th. So I think that's the only, and the 15th is a holiday. So maybe we'll work on the time a little bit for that one. And we'll have maybe do some email checking just to see if we can find another date that would work during the session.
I was going to say, Scott, I think, I don't know about representatives. I think most of the Fridays are usually pro forma. So I don't know if that would be something workable.
Can work on, looking for form.
Is this something on the 8th that we could do not at 1, but earlier in the morning? Would that fit with your guys' schedule? And then we could look at changing it to Fridays with what you just said?
Let us work on that. And again, we need to have a meeting in Wichita. We could also have some satellite sites, so it's a little easier to participate too as we go forward. So we'll work on both of those tracks. That's our agenda for today. Are there any other items that the panel has for discussion or? And we will work on the kind of work plan for the 2024, but that's got to include studying workforce issues and items that we'd want to look at in terms of legislative changes or approaches, catchment area, privatization as well, or running it through a private contractor. And I think we'll also, by the time we get to maybe March or April, if we stay on the timeline, we'll have some other design questions coming from the architects as well that we'll have. We'll get to see this built literally from the ground up, even before the ground is there.
Scott, when you start to say workforce, whenever we have that discussion, can you say everything from customer service, front desk to registered nurses, what all of that looks like, how many we are looking at, and where the challenges are for a certain type of nurse or CNA or LPN or medical assistant or co-responder? What are the most challenged positions that we're having the hardest time hiring for?
Do that. We're pretty close on our staffing model for the whole facility at 50 or 100 beds. So we should be able to share kind of what we're going to look for in terms of direct care staff, but also therapists, psychiatrists, pharmacy. Some of those are whether we private, how much of that we contract out for, but I think we'll have that by not by January, but by February or March, we'll have that pretty well figured out.
I just have a quick process question. So you're having the town hall tomorrow,
Yes.
and then a recommendation is going to the BOCC on the 20th. Is there a mechanism? Will you be able to communicate out what that recommendation is in advance to this group?
Not for the 20th. Tanya, you don't know. We can certainly share what feedback we get from the town hall meeting tomorrow. If there's survey, we're going to do a live survey and a paper survey, so we'll know the results of that pretty quickly after the town hall in terms of what the public that comes to the town hall would suggest.
Scott, I think we talked about maybe before we go to the commission, maybe having an executive session with this group to talk about our recommendations. I don't know if you wanted to do that.
That would be another option. Is the panel interested in hearing that? We've got your conflict of interest statements, so there wouldn't be any issue with that if we came together on a call in executive session. We could talk about that.
We're going to get asked. I'd rather be at the table than on the menu. So
That's
yeah.
fair. That's very fair. Okay. We'll work on trying to set that up for. I'm sorry.
There's 8 days.
I was hoping there'd be a preference of one of the 8 days. Not tomorrow. We can it won't be the 20th. Friday or Monday. I don't know, Tom.
Whatever they want to do.
Yeah. Do it by phone. We'll talk about it and I'll communicate that out to the panel. Maybe tomorrow or after the town hall before Wednesday.
Friday with them.
I'm sorry.
Friday next morning, we're going to be on call.
Thank you for your interest. It's extremely valuable to us to think about your considerations, gather your considerations, but also try to make sure we're meeting your informational needs. It's helping inform other parts of the process as well. So it's extremely valuable. I don't say that enough. Any other items for today? Okay, well, I don't think I'll take a motion to adjourn. Well, if there are any other items of business, we'll adjourn for today. Thank you for your time. And if you would like to attend the town hall meeting tomorrow, it's from 5 to 7 at the Hughes Metroplex room A. Room A. Thank you.